Pushkin.
Pushkin. Previously on Hot Money.
First of all, I thought someone might have been murdered. But I did think, well, there's no ambulances or anything, and there's no police cars. And then I saw these men or women all blacked out with balaclavas on.
Marsalek really was like a sort of ghost that haunted this trial. He was clearly the organising mind, and he was there in black and white in these telegram messages.
If I was a border control guard, though, I would notice the expiry date on that Czech passport. Passports never last more than 10 years, do they?
Right. I mean, I didn't know that.
That doesn't look right.
I'm back with Paul Murphy, my old editor and the person who first put me onto the Jan Marsalek story. And I've brought copies of some identity documents, passports and a few photos.
Konstantin Vladimirovich Bayazov. I've got a picture of him here dressed in a kind of very ornate gold Orthodox priest's kind of mantle, carrying a candle. Oh no, it's not a candle, it's a chalice covered with a cloth. Looks like a sort of slightly more weathered Marsalek, but they do look similar. Similar kind of face shape.
You do, actually.
Yeah. So basically he's nicked his identity.
If he's travelling to places like Dubai as a Russian Orthodox priest, that's going to kind of crimp his operation.
I have no idea if Marsalek actually travelled anywhere dressed in the full vestments of the Russian Orthodox Church, but I do know this is one of the identities he's been using in recent years, and there are plenty more. Some are from real people, some are names that are completely made up. A Frenchman from Strasbourg, Alexandre Schmidt, and a Belgian of the same name, an Austrian, Max Mauer. I've also had tips about a possible Israeli identity, even a Namibian one.
I noticed that he's lopped a couple of years off his age.
On which one?
The Belgian driving licence, saying he's born in 82. He wasn't, he was born in 1980.
For much of the last few years, figuring out ways to conceal his identity has really been the major preoccupation for Marsalek. Disappearing in an age of ubiquitous CCTV and now facial recognition software, it's no easy task, so much so that he's even told people he's had plastic surgery. And yet, despite being one of the world's most wanted men, Marsalek has managed to maintain allies in countries all over the world. I've already told you about his networks in Austria, the UK and Libya, but his connections actually reach much further, something brought into focus by the reams of messages that were revealed through the case of the Bulgarian spy ring, the trial we heard about in the last episode. Those messages show that Marsalek has a network of business contacts, corrupt officials and pals that spans the globe. And there's one particular network that I want to discuss with Paul.
And actually, information came to us really at the end of the trial that kind of points to the fact that this network of his around the world, it might include some contacts that are a lot more surprising than any we've found out about so far.
I'm intrigued.
Because Jan Marsalek, he's someone who's dedicated himself to acting in Russia's interests, working in the shadows to push the Kremlin's agenda, but not exclusively. I'm Sam Jones from the Financial Times and Pushkin Industries. This is Hot Money, Season 3, Agent of Chaos. Episode 8, Matryoshka.
Great. Thanks again for picking us up.
Oh, a pleasure. Sat nav takes you to a field about half a mile away.
Before we get to Marsalek's wider network, there's someone I knew I needed to speak to. Someone who can help me understand what Russia really wants and why an agent like Jan Marsalek is the perfect fit. Chris Donnelly lives in a remote corner of Britain. My producer Peggy and I travelled there to meet him.
Hi there. This is Sam. Fintech.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Chris is a respected Kremlin analyst, a cold warrior. And at 79, Chris still finds himself a personal target for Russia. His house burned down under mysterious circumstances several years ago, and as a result, he's still regularly in contact with Special Branch, the unit of the UK's police who handles sensitive political cases, about possible ongoing threats to him.
Still really is an issue. The police have the house under storm alert. We've got security systems.
Right, okay.
We're not sure how it came to burn down.
We're sitting in the drawing room of Chris's ancient manor house. Through the window are views across rolling hills to distant peaks. Chris has offered us a glass of dry white wine, while his wife gets an omelette lunch ready in their big farmhouse kitchen. The contrast between what we're here to talk about, the very English romance of the setting, and Chris's quiet, generous hospitality is almost surreal, and not for the first time in this series, I feel the thinness of the boundary between the conventions of spy fact and fiction. Especially when he tells me how all this started for him, back when he was 22 years old. Chris was studying for a Russian language degree and had a desire to really immerse himself in the country. On his second visit there, his idealism met with the reality of Russian power head-on. It was 1968.
I drove my Mini there with a colleague, and we ended up being arrested and put on trial and thrown out of the country.
Wow. You'd driven your Mini
to Moscow, and then from Moscow down to the Caucasus, and then from the Caucasus into Ukraine, and wonder why all the roads are full of tanks.
Chris had inadvertently driven his Mini Cooper into one of the defining events of the Cold War, a crackdown that would forever change the reputation of the Soviet Union. Those tanks were on their way to Czechoslovakia to unseat the country's government and stop its liberal reforms.
From the Russian point of view, it was obvious we were there to spy on the tanks. From our point of view, there were just obstacles in the way of our driving. We didn't know what was going on.
Blimey, okay. Must have been a bit of a hair-raising experience.
It makes you think. And it set me on a course of wanting to understand the mentality and why and how Russians think differently.
Chris tells me he spent a week in jail in Odessa before the Russians sent him home. He would go on to become one of the most respected Russia watchers in the West. He taught for years at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and his expertise meant he would eventually advise the leaders of Western governments on Russia and how to handle it. And then 1989 came. By then, Chris was working for NATO. He'd heard that something was going on at the border between West and East Germany, so he drove there to see it for himself. And what he witnessed, it's an image that has stayed with him vividly ever since. A family leaving East Germany, the first time they were free to do that in decades.
A family of 5 stuffed inside a Trabant, which is something smaller than a Mini and made of cardboard, with a 2-stroke, 3-cylinder engine. They then moved through the gates and out into Germany. They were suddenly surrounded by 1,000 people waiting for them. We pulled them out of the car, kissed them, gave them money. I thought, it's happened. There's no control of this.
I can see exactly why this makes Chris well up to this day. His whole adult life, he dedicated himself to trying to understand and fight this huge repressive regime. And suddenly, in a blink, it was tumbling apart. All captured in that one single human moment of a solitary car, a single family, driving to their freedom, being welcomed by thousands of fellow Germans they'd been forcibly separated from all their lives. Chris, like almost everyone, thought the fall of the wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union that followed was the beginning of a new world. But in Russia itself, change brought chaos. And in the dying days of the presidency of Boris Yeltsin, Putin and his people began to come out of the shadows.
So these guys are not politicians in the Western sense of people who have risen through political party processes. They are former intelligence officers and military people with an intelligence war mindset, a war mindset, who have now turned the tradecraft of the KGB into the statecraft of the Russian state.
A mindset that began all the way back in 1917 when the Russian Revolution brought the Bolsheviks to power and has endured ever since.
Because the whole Russian system remained on a war footing and never moved to a peacetime footing, because it lived with this understanding that the world was hostile. All the outside world is hostile. Everyone's an enemy, and we might have to fight.
As Chris tells me more about how Russia thinks about war, I begin to better grasp the plots that Jan Marsalek organised, to better understand how they fit into a Russian strategy and what the principles of that strategy are.
So the first principle of war in Russia is surprise. Mm-hmm. It's actually внезапность, suddenness.
Yeah.
The second principle is activeness, keep moving, keep them off balance. The third principle is maskirovka, hide what you do, because there's no ground to hide behind, no hills or valleys to move up in secret.
Many of these principles, as Chris explains, can be traced right back to things as simple as the geography of Russia itself. Like that last one, maskirovka. Your forces need to mask their intentions through psychological tricks because they can't rely on the environment, the flat, open terrain, to hide them.
You're all in the open, so you have to be deceitful in the good sense of the term. Then temp operacji, the tempo of the operation, you've got to keep the whole thing moving at a large scale and not get bogged down. You don't know where the enemy is, so razviedka bojem, reconnaissance by battle. You actually attack the enemy to find out what he's going to do, because he doesn't know either. So the intelligence can't do that. So everything's proactive, starting from your basic principles.
You don't need to worry about staying hidden if you can confuse. You don't need to be careful if you can be fast. And with all of this, you can give your operatives, you want to give your operatives, a whole load of freedom to make decisions. You let them succeed or fail based on their own merits. You just set an overarching objective and then let your agents see how far they can push things.
You're giving the guys free license to go and attack what they can and destroy it, as long as they maintain that main aim. The mentality is coherent throughout the whole approach. They make sense.
To a Western intelligence agency, it might look reckless to cultivate an agent like Marsalek, the author of a massive fraud with an appetite for the high life and a penchant for games and mystery. But to the GRU, Russia's military intelligence agency, an organization primed to test constantly for points of weakness, to act unexpectedly, and to push in areas where it suddenly finds advantage, it makes total sense. Now, I do want to be clear that not all Russian intelligence is like this. But the GRU school of covert action, it's the one that has really come to dominate Russian thinking in recent years. The GRU is having its moment.
So under that description, would you say that to take that kind of battlefield doctrine and apply it to European society at large, that we kind of got to a stage at one point where Russian intelligence had kind of broken through and was so successful, and then people would just go and make a mess, go and break things?
Yeah, the fact there is a controlling mind directing the attack doesn't mean to say that that mind is micromanaging with a long screwdriver for every little operation. You couldn't do it. Not without slowing everything down.
I suppose it's a very different way of covert action to what we might think of in the UK or the US.
Yeah, one of the biggest differences is it carries with it a lot of risk. But in Russian terms, it's not unjustifiable risk. In war, you have to take risks, and you have to reward people for taking risks. And you have to let them make mistakes and learn from them. You have to have trial and error in war. At the moment in the West, we have error and trial.
This all seems like it very neatly ties a bow on this story, that it helps us to understand Marsalek as the perfect Russian agent of chaos. Except, as I keep telling you, spy stories, they tend to take unexpected turns. And the more I delve into the Telegram message haul, the one from the trial of the Bulgarians in London, the more I begin to feel that there's an important complication to all of this. Because Marsalek's relationship with the Russian state, it's not entirely straightforward, not entirely clear-cut. When I think of the most successful Russian spies, of perfect agents, being a Brit, there's someone who instantly comes to mind. Kim Philby, one of the most effective spies of the Cold War, a Russian mole right at the top of British intelligence for years. I don't mean to compare Marsalek to Philby in terms of what they did as spies, but just to observe that when Philby eventually had to flee to Moscow, he was given a hero's welcome, a new official life, a prestigious apartment. And that is not what appears to have happened to Jan Marsalek. Take all those passports Paul Murphy and I were looking at. When I went back to the messages between Jan Marsalek and Orlin Rusev, Marsalek's man in Great Yarmouth, the guy helping to run the Bulgarian spy ring, I started to see hints of a different narrative. We've asked a friend of the show to read Marsalek's messages.
The good thing is the French guy even looks a bit like me. But we can change the name, right?
They spend a long time discussing how to make this passport look real, and they talk about their options to get others for Marsalek too. You see, in the messages, while it's the plots and the schemes that are the marmalade droppers, it's actually the crumbs of meaning between the headline material that can open up a whole new perspective on things. So to me, the implication here is that Marsalek's escape to Russia isn't something that's been organised with official sanction, because Russia's secret services don't seem to be automatically furnishing Jan Marsalek with new documents. He's having to get them for himself, through Rusev, and sometimes struggling. And this isn't the only thing that tells me Marsalek's new life in Moscow is complicated. After Marsalek disappeared, I suppose we all thought that this €2 billion hole in Wirecard's accounts, at least some of it must have been money plundered by him. But in reality, in Moscow, at least early on, he seems to be having money problems. Here, he tells Rusev about his wrangles with the FSB, Russia's main domestic intelligence agency.
Sorry, I was fighting the whole day today with the cash crypto guy and the FSB. Effing mess.
He and Rusev discuss in dozens and dozens of messages how he might open a bank account in Russia, which is near impossible without official documents. They talk about how they might use crypto brokers to try and get money for him. Marsalek tells Rusev it's a media narrative that he's got tens of millions stashed in Bitcoin. I asked my colleague Helen Worrell about what she made of all of this, because she covered the trial for the FT, but also because she spent many years covering intelligence and security.
He talks about at one point that the FSB having to approve his cleaning lady. So, there's obviously lots of sort of domestic issues. Almost every part of his life is somehow constrained and overseen. And you get the impression that he's constantly trying to prove his use to the FSB and the GRU in a way that sort of seems slightly exhausting and also quite kind of needy. You can see that he's sort of bridling against the idea that he's in captivity here. Before, obviously, he became a wanted person by Germany and Interpol. He led this very international lifestyle, and there are signs that he's trying to sort of get back to that, albeit in quite a constrained way.
What all of this says to me is that Marsalek is not an on-the-books agent, someone who is controlled by Russian intelligence in a formalized way. And it seems he's even having to work hard to justify his host's continued protection. But maybe there's a flip side to having a less structured relationship with the Russian state, a little bit more freedom to pursue your own interests. Where you can, anyway. In June 2021, for example, Marsalek began discussing a new scheme with Rusev. The Russian state will need to be kept informed.
I'm waiting for input from our friends.
And indeed, they will be a client in this scheme. But the scheme primarily will be a money-making operation, with Marsalek and Rusev as the middlemen, to sell arms to clients in Africa. Rusev tells Marsalek his contacts want to spend up to $60 million on guns and other weapons. He's already organised a test run for the route, he says, via Dubai. They will be paying in diamonds.
Fancy rebels.
Marsalek evidently scents a further opportunity if they can not just transport the arms, but also sell them themselves.
Do they have a supplier for the guns and vehicles, or can we become an end-to-end supplier? We can also provide training if needed.
Neither of them cares who these weapons are going to. Marsalek asks if it's a government-backed force, and Rusev replies, who knows? Then the letters TIA, which stands for This is Africa. It's a quote he likes to use, he tells Marsalek, from the movie Blood Diamond. This kind of scheme, it's not a one-off. Marsalek is also involved in setting up a back channel to get weaponry from China to Russia, drones, for example, or ways to smuggle microchips into the country too.
I mean, I would say that the things that involve making money are things that Rusev and Marsalek come up between themselves, sort of brokering arms deals, trying to get weapons from China to Russia to help on the Ukraine battlefield in a kind of deniable way. So I would say their money-making schemes are things that they suggest rather than things that come down from the top.
And many of these schemes involve offering kickbacks to men at the GRU and the FSB in order to get them off the ground. As Marsalek tells Rusev, his new life in Russia...
It's like a Russian Matryoshka doll of motivations within secret ambitions.
You may have had a Russian Matryoshka doll when you were a kid. They're those wooden dolls that have a series of slightly smaller dolls within them. Marsalek reportedly had a set in his office, featuring great Russian leaders past and present. The novelty is, I suppose, that you're never sure when you've reached the innermost doll, the core of something. In this story, I've sometimes had the feeling that we never will, that with Jan Marsalek and his many personas, the surprises will just keep coming. Even so, I wasn't quite prepared for the next one, which came to light at the end of the Bulgarian trial, at their sentencing. In May, Orlin Rusev appeared in court to be sentenced. At the outset of the trial, he had pled guilty, but his lawyer had a wild card to play, a plea for mitigation.
This was a very surprising development, I have to say. It was also, I would say, quite a sort of bold and risky gambit by Rusev's lawyer. He essentially told the court that Marsalek had received a request from the CIA to help airlift some US personnel from Kabul during the military withdrawal in August of 2021.
So that is quite the claim. Marsalek contracting for the CIA, working on demand for the arch nemesis of his Russian paymasters. Rusev's defense made the case that getting Americans out of Kabul was a humanitarian action and showed that he deserved a more lenient sentence because he had been willing to help out Western interests too when it was a question of saving people's lives. You might recall the situation. After nearly 20 years, the US military was withdrawing from Afghanistan. But the final months of that process were chaotic. The Taliban unexpectedly surged towards Kabul, the capital. Thousands of Westerners and many Afghanis who had worked with them were desperate to flee, and there simply weren't enough flights out of the country. The prosecution told the judge that Rusev's whole argument was wrong. Firstly, they said there was no evidence that the CIA ever made such a request. And second, they poured cold water on the idea that Rusev had some kind of humanitarian conscience at his centre.
I mean, obviously the prosecution came back absolutely full throttle against this mitigation.
As in they really tried to slap it down.
They did. And, they said, look, this is not evidence of a humanitarian motivation. It just shows that these people were motivated by money and they do whatever work was necessary by whoever was prepared to pay them. And, the idea that somehow they were as happy to work for the CIA as they were for the GRU or the FSB was sort of a misleading idea.
The thing is, though, this wild claim about the airlift made by the defence barrister in court, it's all there in black and white in the telegram messages between Rusev and Marsalek from the time.
Interesting request from our sort of friends at the CIA.
This is Marsalek writing to Rusev on August 17th, 2021, 3 days after the evacuation of Kabul began.
They urgently need aircraft to fly out contractors from Afghanistan. Apparently, all dodgy airlift companies in Russia and Turkey, etc., are already sold out or refuse to fly because insurance won't cover the loss of an aircraft. Do you know anyone who's a bit rogue and operates large-scale airplanes?
Now, Rusev, he does know people who can fly planes. He replies that his father operated as a pilot of fortune for years and has lots of experience in, quote, exotic locations, like running guns into Africa, he writes. It will be tricky, though, Rusev tells Marsalek. The situation on the ground in Afghanistan is a nightmare. Marsalek replies,
America needs you. Pax Americana rests on your broad and manly shoulders.
There's evidently some tongue-in-cheek here, but the telegram messages, the more of them I read, the less they seem like a joke. There's so much detail here. They discuss plane types, costs, timing, permissions for landings and airspace access.
Just discussing with the Americans, apparently since 11 a.m. today the airport is okay and 15 military aircraft took off today. But it can change any moment.
I can't tell you what did or didn't happen in Kabul regarding these flights in the end, but I have 3 hypotheses. 1, Marsalek has himself been duped. The people he's talking to aren't really anything to do with the CIA. 2, he's lying, either because he's trying to impress Rusev or because it's part of some disinformation ploy. Or 3, it's true. He really was trying to set up flights for people at the CIA, or at least people close to it. But then something else came to mind. Something which happened way back in the winter of 2018.
Paul, do you remember the uncles?
I do.
I'm chatting with Paul Murphy again, my former editor, about a lead we had been given about Marsalek. At the time, we set it aside because it was just a single fleck of evidence and, frankly, we had our hands full.
We were at that point of intense coverage of the Wirecard fraud story, and suddenly, out of the blue, I got an email from somebody anonymously saying that they had been looped into an email conversation accidentally, and I might be interested in the content.
Been looped in as in someone had typed the wrong email address and it had sent it to them.
Precisely that.
The person who accidentally received this chain of emails was a software engineer based in Hong Kong. Paul dispatched a reporter to meet this person. The software engineer didn't want to forward the emails electronically, so they gave the reporter hard copies, and the reporter faxed them to Paul.
And they're quite extraordinary. It was a series of emails between a group of, I assume, men who referred to themselves as the uncles. And there were talking to Jan, who had been put in touch with them to get advice on a particular challenge.
Paul and I dug up the emails. Here's the first message Jan Marsalek sends to the uncles.
Gentlemen, it is a great pleasure meeting you! ! Our mutual friend speaks very highly of you, and I look forward to meeting you in person one day. Thank you for introducing us and your kind introductory words.
Marsalek goes on to explain why he's getting in touch. He needs help with a project he's working on, an attempt to move the Austrian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
It's been suggested that you may be able to provide us with advice on how to establish an informal channel to explore the United States' position on the subject and to provide guidance on how to navigate the complexities of the issue within the international community. Also, any assistance in shaping the domestic dialogue on the subject in Austria would be appreciated.
Suffice to say that moving embassies in Israel has become a symbolic issue for some parts of the far right in both Austria and the US. With that in mind, the big question is, who are the uncles?
There are kind of, the 5 or 6 email addresses, all Proton mail addresses. We were able to identify a number of these.
Because there's sort of giveaway snippets of information in the emails themselves that allow us to assign identities to these different people in this email chain, right? With a relatively high degree of confidence of who they are, and we don't want to mention them for legal reasons at this stage. But you can tell us about who these kind of people are, what kind of world they move in.
Okay, so one of them is a very senior former CIA officer, somebody who oversaw, active operations in a certain theatre of war. Another one is a former US ambassador. We're talking here about people who are, basically ex-US military, ex-US intelligence, all talking together online and calling themselves as a group the Uncles. The fact is, we didn't know what to make of this at the time.
No, it was just so weird because, we thought, okay, we've got other stuff on our plate and this is so tangential to what we're doing.
And then 7 years later, the messages about this airlift in Kabul came to light. And I began to wonder whether there was some kind of network here after all. A group with links to the CIA that Marsalek had somehow found his way into. Maybe a group who shared some particular geopolitical views on the world and values.
This is a great line. Let's please remember that we should also pay some attention to financial opportunities while you all play your Game of Thrones. Which encapsulates for me the kind of the kind of weird world that these people are in, where they are simultaneously looking for opportunities to make money through corruption and, dodgy dealing business. And also they're looking to kind of, exert geopolitical leverage and change through informal means, through back channels, through people like Jan Marsalek.
There's a real sense here that Jan was actually knitted into this group.
Yeah, what we don't have is any, huge trove of evidence, but what we do have is kind of an intuition that there's something here. There's the shadow of some kind of network or world or, a group of people that crosses countries that Marsalek is involved with. And this isn't just a Russia thing anymore.
When I think of many of the people I've learned about as I've reported on this series, people who've been cultivated by Marsalek and who have cultivated him, money, power and risk, those seem to be what motivates them all. But actually, something else I think is behind the pursuit of those things. The key, something we've been bumping up against for this entire series. Disdain for the way the ordinary world operates, for living by the rules, being limited by them. I mean this both as a psychological characteristic, but also as a broader political one that you might better describe as anti-establishmentism. A political belief that things need to be undermined, broken. For Jan Marsalek, I've come to understand this as a big part of his view of the world. A gifted, if flawed young man, but someone whose pursuit of what made him different fed a deep cynicism about what he saw as the pieties of the world most people lived in. And he sought out worlds that seemed to expose that. A payment processing company making its money from gambling and porn, the ease of establishing a vast international fraud, and of course spying. It's one of the biggest seductions of spying, that you're inducted into a secret club, the people who really run the world. People who make decisions and don't have to follow the normal moral rules of society. When I first heard about Jan Marsalek, I felt he was the key to understanding something about Russia, the country that first lured him in, a country whose government had turned disdain against the liberal world order into its entire mode of statecraft. But actually, what I now think is that it's not just a story about Russia, it's a story about us too. Because this disdain, this anger against the establishment, it's spread. It's no longer something in the shadowy world of crime and clandestine political networks. It's a political force. It's a way of doing business. Funnily enough, I think it was Kilian Kleinschmidt, who we met in Tunisia, who first latched onto this notion. Fitting, I suppose, given that he was the first to give me an insight into the destructive life of Jan Marsalek.
That's his kick, that's his adrenaline. It's like playing a video game or something. The rules-based world is increasingly collapsing, so it gives also more and more space for this. That's what has been happening over the last few years.
So it's Jan's world out there.
It's the Jan's world becomes the normal.
Marsalek and people like him, they are agents of chaos. They're playing a game against the world they were born into. And they're winning. Hot Money is a production of the Financial Times and Pushkin Industries. It was written and reported by me, Sam Jones. The senior producer and co-writer is Peggy Sutton. Our producer is Izzy Carter. Our researcher is Maureen Saint. Our show is edited by Karen Shakurji. Fact-checking by Kira Levine. Sound design and mastering by Jake Gorski and Marcelo de Oliveira, with additional sound design by Izzy Carter. Original music from Matthias Bossi and John Evans of Stellwagen Symphonette. Our show art is by Sean Carney. Our executive producers are Cheryl Brumley, Amy Gaines McQuaid, and Matthew Garahan. Additional editing by Paul Murphy. Special thanks to Rula Khalaf, Dan McCrum, Laura Clark, Alistair Mackey, Manuela Saragosa, Nigel Hansen, Vicky Merrick, with special thanks to the Studio Audio Berlin and to James Morris, who read Jan Marsalek's messages, and Eric Sandler, Morgan Ratner, Jake Flanagan, Jacob Goldstein, Sarah Nix, and Greta Cohn. I'm Sam Jones. I want to take a moment to thank you for being a Pushkin Plus subscriber. I hope you're enjoying Hot Money. Be sure to take advantage of all Pushkin Plus has to offer, including ad-free access to all Pushkin shows, bonus episodes, early access, exclusive binges, and full audiobooks after this episode.